From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and here's what's coming up. This week's cattle market insight, this time from Derrell of Oklahoma State University. He'll comment on what he thinks was a short-term retreat in fed cattle prices last week. And Derrell looks ahead to the opportunity to add market value to stocker and feeder calves by putting them on feed this fall before they're shipped to the feedlot. Also, highlights from the latest Cattle Chat podcast from the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. Brad White and Bob Larson will take a look at keeping records on cow-calf production and the merits of early preg-checking the herd, especially those bred heifers. And Jeff Wickman awaits with this week's Kansas 4-H segment. Plus more right here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Good to have you aboard for another Agriculture Today. And starting off with our weekly look at the cattle markets, we bring in via phone from his office in Stillwater, Oklahoma, livestock economist Derrell of Oklahoma State University. A grab bag of things we'll take on this time around, Derrell, but a quick review of the markets last week. The fed cattle trade, to begin with that, stumbled a bit, and always of concern when that happens, of course.
Yeah, I think this is just kind of working our way through the rest of summer here. We've got adequate supplies. Feedlots actually enjoyed a little bit of kind of a midsummer rally, which wasn't really expected, I think. And now we're coming back down off of that here as we go through the last part of the summer. But the other way to look at this is that we've probably held prices for these fed cattle as good or better than many people expected through the summer. So I think that's the positive way to take a look at this, even though we continue to see certainly ample supplies as we go forward.
So you think this is just a brief break from that unexpected summer rally more than anything else?
I really do, and again, we're getting close enough now. We'll start seeing some Labor Day demand for meat, and in fact, if you look up to the box beef level, it's kind of stabilized, hasn't really gained much, but certainly kind of has stopped that midsummer slump. It looks like. So I think there's reasons to think that we can kind of go maybe a little bit sideways here, and then start to think about a little bit of a rally as we move towards the end of August and on into September.
Since you bring it up on the domestic demand side, then what were the indicators that would suggest we're going to see a nice run here for a couple of weeks or so?
Well, the box beef market, again, we're buying now for Labor Day, and so, we're starting to see a little bit of that last summer grilling demand really kick in, but that's kind of what brings us out of the summer doldrums. Beef demand, even with the weakness we've had over the last few weeks, has really held in a broader perspective very, very well, given that we're talking about, for 2018 on an annual basis, we're looking at record beef production, record pork production, and record poultry production. Now, consumption in the U.S. Won't be at a record level because we have been successful at exporting part of that additional tonnage of meat. But the fact is, we're really challenging this market, and beef demand has held up remarkably well given the availability of competing meats at very attractive prices.
Do you think that the beef sector can maintain that relative strength then, in that we are awash in pork, awash in poultry, and will be for some time?
Well, yeah, I think there's no reason to think we can at this point. Again, beef demand has been strong, even though, it seems to be preferences-based, but it's also based in part on strong macroeconomic conditions right now, low unemployment, consumers are spending readily. If nothing disrupts that, or, on the other hand, if nothing seriously disrupts the trade part of it, and that puts more, so let's say pork is the most likely case to dump more meat back into the domestic market. So, if none of those things happen, then there's no reason to expect a change at this point, but certainly there is some vulnerability there as we go forward from those sort of external market factors that could impact beef demand.
And speaking of exports, what signals are you reading lately of either direction, as a matter of fact?
Well, we've been very impressed, I think, very pleasantly surprised this year with the strength of beef exports. Beef exports are up on a year-to-date basis to all of our major export markets. Japan is the biggest market. It's up about 6.5% for the year. South Korea is the second largest market, but is up a whopping 42% for the year-to-date. Canada, Mexico, and Hong Kong are all up as well. So we've enjoyed broad-based, strong demand for our beef exports this year.
So when you look at that side of it, that's going to remain firm footing for a time.
I think so. And in terms of the tariff and trade issues, most of those are not too direct. We do have some issues and some unknowns yet with respect to NAFTA and Mexico and Canada. But the other thing to keep in mind is, of course, we could see some impacts on exchange rates depending on dollar strength and strength or weakness in other currencies. And so that is a factor to keep in mind. But right now, it's not really causing those, much in the way of problems.
Very good. Want to spend some time this week, Derrell, talking about the outlook for feeder cattle, stocker cattle going into this fall market. First of all, before we do that, just a quick look back at this past week. What signals on feeder cattle prices were you seeing?
Well, in Oklahoma, our combined auction prices for this last week showed the heavier weight feeder cattle actually steady with the week before. Calf prices actually advanced about 4% last year from last year on the lighter weight cattle. And if you look at across the board from light to heavyweights, prices right now in Oklahoma, and I think in the Southern Plains generally, are running 4 to 5% above this time last year. So that's pretty remarkable, given that we know that there's ample supplies of feeder cattle out there and a bigger calf crop, a bunch of which will come to town here in the fall with our fall calf run.
So that said, what are your numbers telling you about the choices that producers can make in as far as their stockers and their feeders coming into the fall, just how to manage their ownership or their feeding programs?
Well, I think from a cow-calf perspective, we normally expect from August on calf prices to see a 4 to 5% decline to an October low. Certainly there's plenty of supply pressure to make that happen this year. So the question really comes down to the stocker demand side in the Southern Plains. Wheat pasture demand for cattle for winter grazing is a very important component of our fall feeder markets. And so, we really have to watch two things there. I think one is just the physical conditions that would allow us to have good wheat pasture and lots of demand for cattle to graze that pasture this fall. That's a bit up in the air right now, although we've got some cooler, wetter weather right now that could be very helpful to relieve some of the dry conditions we've got. The other side of it is if you look at price relationships right now in terms of what a stocker producer looks at for value of gain, it's actually kind of attractive right now. Those lighter weight calf prices are actually relatively low compared to the heavier weight feeder cattle. That translates into a good margin, if you will, or a value of gain for stocker producers. And if that relationship persists into the fall, then I think that's going to be the market telling us that, feedlots have plenty of big cattle. They would really like stocker producers to put that weight on those lightweight cattle out in the country before they come to town as heavier weight feeder cattle.
And in fact, and we can tie this in, the USDA is suggesting in its latest report that corn will be readily available. Corn prices are likely to be held at current levels, if not lower, because of this crop coming in, if all of that holds. So that simply lends to the value of gain and the cost of gain in a favorable way, doesn't it?
Well, certainly, it does. From a feedlot perspective, it's going to keep cost of gain in check. And if you look over on an average over a period of time, that feedlot cost of gain is really the main driver of what stocker producers see as the value of gain. They're sort of mirror images of each other. And right now, as I said, that value of gain is quite a bit higher than the feedlot cost of gain, which is a way of saying there's plenty of cattle out there. Feedlots can buy what they want, which is typically bigger feeder cattle, and they're more than willing to let the stocker industry have the additional value of gain to put weight on those lighter weight cattle and take them up to heavier weights. So I think there may be a real opportunity here. That may also translate for cow-calf producers, at least some cow-calf producers, into thinking about retaining ownership of these stockers up to some heavier weights past weaning.
But producers need to put a pencil to it and watch the shifting sands of the market as they make plans toward that end, right?
Absolutely. We got to watch how these markets evolve this fall. We got to watch how forage conditions evolve this fall. It's a very dynamic situation, and the fall is always that way. But again, it does appear there's at least a decent chance for some opportunities this fall.
And one more thing on this, you mentioned the wheat pasture option, and yes, some moisture is coming in, but that too is still up in the air because of our summer dryness, and we need to see moisture catch up considerably to establish good wheat pasturing opportunities.
That's exactly right. If you look at the drought monitor, there's still lots of widespread, marginal to fairly extreme drought conditions. Current moisture is helping the surface soil moisture levels, but we really need some sustained and some widespread rains to really generate the right kind of conditions for good wheat pasture this fall.
And as we look ahead to this trading week, once more the Fed cattle market took a couple of steps back, but where do you think prices might be heading this week?
Well, I think it's a plus or minus kind of thing from current levels. It may be a little bit early to really think we're going to kick in with a bunch more, demand that would pull these prices back up. It certainly could happen, but I don't know that I would really expect it. But at the same time, I'm not necessarily looking for a lot of weakness. So I'm going to hedge here and say sideways, plus or minus. Again, I think we're kind of, we need another week or two probably to get past this midsummer kind of market and get our eyes firmly on that fall market.
But the longer term is leaning toward the positive, you say?
I think so. Again, we know there's going to be plenty of cattle out there, but this demand picture has just been so supportive, not only through this summer, generally speaking, but for many months. And as long as that persists, and there's no reason right now to think it won't persist, then I think we have reason to be somewhat optimistic as we go into the fourth quarter.
Good input. As always, Derrell, we'll catch up with you again in a couple of weeks or so. Appreciate your time, as always.
You're very welcome.
He is a livestock economist at Oklahoma State University, Derrell Peel, contributing his thoughts on the cattle market trends on this Agriculture Today. Now this break, when we come back, thoughts on a couple of subjects of interest to you cow-calf producers from the crew at the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State, as we'll draw once again from the weekly BCI podcast. That's next, here on the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
We're back now on Agriculture Today and more for you cattle producers now from the Beef Cattle Institute here at Kansas State University. Highlights from the latest BCI Cattle Chat podcast. The topics this week of particular interest to you cow-calf operators, and covering them, K-State veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson.
Good morning. Welcome to BCI Cattle Chat. I'm Brad White, joined by Bob Larson. We'll discuss record-keeping, cow record-keeping programs, and then we're getting close to the end of summer, but I also want to discuss early preg-check. We sometimes talk about pregnancy testing, especially heifers early. We'll talk about pros and cons for doing that. Records in your cow-calf herd. So you and I have had this discussion a couple times. How important is it to keep records in the cow herd?
And this is a great question, because I may not give the answer that people expect. I think that beef cow herds don't require the level of records that a dairy operation or a swine operation or a feedlot operation does, and it really has to do with the production cycle. Basically, we produce one calf crop a year, and we treat all the animals as a herd. They're kind of going through the same production phases all at the same time. And that's very different than a dairy operation where there's a group of cows calving every week throughout the year, and production is being sold every week. Same thing on a swine operation or a feedlot operation. So cow-calf operation is different than some of the other.
So are you talking about just the frequency of collection, or do you think they just need no records?
No, I don't mean that they need no records,
Okay.
but so yeah, of course I'm at the university. I'm a veterinarian. I like having records. I like being able to answer questions about the herd. But in reality, a lot of times that can be done with a much simpler system than is required in areas of agriculture that have faster turnover of product and marketing and honestly just decisions that are being made. Again, I'll use dairy as an example. Cows are being bred every week. And so it takes a little more record keeping to keep track of how successful we are, where are the problems, those types of things. We still need those same kind of answers to questions in the beef industry, in the cow-calf side, but it's not an every week of the year event.
So if you could pick one record that you're going to keep or one piece of information that would help you evaluate the farm, how the ranch is doing in the cow-calf operation specifically here, what would you pick?
I would probably pick the percentage of cows that get pregnant early in the breeding season, so the first 20 or 30 days of the breeding season, the percentage of calves that are sold per cow exposed. Because if you get to the percentage of calves sold per cow exposed, it ties in how many cows got pregnant. And if we lost calves due to calf disease or something like that, that'll show up as a loss as well. So if a commercial herd has a good percentage of calves sold per cow exposed, then I know that they're doing quite a few things right.
What would that be? What would a good percentage be?
Well, there's going to be a little bit of geographic differences of what I expect from a cow herd. But in Kansas, I'm really expecting 92 to 95% of the cows to get pregnant in a relatively short breeding season and to have relatively little death loss, so less than 5% death loss throughout the system. That's abortions and early calf loss and those kinds of things. So you're talking about upper 80s to lower 90% calves weaned per cow exposed.
So the nice thing about the percent calves weaned per cow exposed is you can calculate it based on knowing the number of weaned calves, the number of cows exposed to the bull, and then if you had some culls in between on the cows. So some pretty straightforward numbers there to get at that base number. Then it's more like a indicator light on your engine. If it's low, lots of things it could be, and that's where we need more in-depth records. And we'll talk, I think, more next week when hopefully Dr. Weber's back, and we'll talk about some of the specifics on records and what we want to keep when.
Yeah.
So early pregnancy testing on heifers, this is something that it's about that time of year as we get into August. It seems early for a lot of pregnancy testing occurs September, October, November, into the fall. We're here in August. Would we think about early pregnancy testing on heifers? And what are the pros and cons or advantages to doing that?
Well, actually, I've gotten a couple of phone calls this past week from veterinarians doing some early preg checks of replacement heifers. The clinicians at the vet school are taking students out, starting to do some preg checking of heifers as well. So it's definitely that time of year. And I think the reason that people tend to like to preg check heifers early is several. One is many herds will breed heifers to calve ahead of cows, which I think is usually a good idea. And so they've been pregnant. They're a little bit farther along in pregnancy than the mature cows. The other thing is with replacement heifers, they don't have calves at side. And so some of the challenges of preg checking cows have to do with, getting the pair in, separating the calf out, dealing with the calf and the cow. And with replacement heifers, I don't have to worry about that. So they're a little bit easier to get up at basically any time that I want to do preg checking. The other thing is it allows us to be more accurate on identifying those heifers that got pregnant early. And again, I think
why is it more accurate?
Okay, so that's a good question because it would appear that it's easier to preg check the later in pregnancy they are. Yeah. And I would agree if you're trying to decide are they pregnant or not. The bigger the calf is in there,
the easier to say if she's pregnant.
Easier to find it. But what becomes difficult is saying how far along in pregnancy she is. Because my goal really is to have heifers that got pregnant their first cycle or their second cycle in that breeding season. So they got pregnant in the first 30 to 40 days of the breeding season, and differentiating those that got pregnant in the first 20 days versus those that didn't get pregnant until 60 or 70 days after the start of the breeding season becomes more difficult when the calf gets big.
But if you AI'd and you wanted to know are they AI pregnancies and you waited a couple weeks to turn in the bull, you could differentiate those two, you think?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that a lot of our clients will ask us to do. So if they AI heifers, we ask them if they want to be able to tell the difference between an AI pregnancy and a bull pregnancy, leave the bulls away from the heifers for 2 weeks and then put them in, but then let the veterinarian come in and do a fairly early preg check. And again, a lot of these are done with ultrasound, but they don't have to be. You can come in and manually preg check if you're doing it, no later than about 100 days after that AI pregnancy.
Okay, so when we're saying early preg check, you're talking about preg checking. So if the bulls, or if they AI'd, then 100 days after the AI date, and if they had a 60-day breeding season, the lower end of that would be around 40 days of gestation. So there may be some of those, if you're not using ultrasound, you have to recheck, or some of those you can pick up depending on the situation and how many days are there. But you want to get in early primarily to detect those early pregnancies, because even when we're talking about records, the percent of those that get bred early is critical. And we've done some work that looks at heifers, and if they calve early, they're going to be more likely to be in the herd. That's also
their lifetime productivity goes up.
Yeah, some of the work out of Nebraska with Dr. Funston has shown really well that their lifetime productivity is better if they calve in that first 21 days of the calving season, get bred back.
Yeah, and so just to make it clear, so it's relatively easy for me to tell the difference between a 100-day pregnancy and an 80-day pregnancy. It's much less easy for me to tell the difference between a 140 and a 160-day pregnancy. Those are going to feel, 140 and 160-day pregnancy are going to feel pretty much the same, but a 100-day versus a 80-day pregnancy feels pretty different. That's what I mean by the earlier I can do the preg check, the more accurate I am at aging the pregnancy.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some marketing advantages for those open heifers. So if they're open heifers and they come out now, in some areas of the country, you may be able to sell those a little bit sooner, get them to a better marketplace than if we wait until lots of those open animals are sold, or non-pregnant animals are sold mid-fall. Yeah,
that's really true. And a lot of these heifers, if they're put on feed right away, they'll still make the younger age cutoffs on the carcass side.
Yep. So I think early preg checking heifers is a good plan. Some people early preg check cows, especially as we've looked at some early weaning this year. Same advantages, disadvantages, and there are some real advantages, especially with heifers, and we care about getting those into the herd as soon as possible. Well, we appreciate you joining us this week. If you have questions or comments, please email us at bci@ksu.edu, and we'd be happy to answer those or talk about them on our show.
Bob Larson and Brad White of K-State featured on this week's BCI Cattle Chat. Also on this week's podcast, Bob and Brad speak at length to the issue of cattle traceability, as they recently participated in national discussions of that objective. And you can hear that podcast in full at beefcattleinstitute.org, beefcattleinstitute.org. Taking us up to the break, one final reminder about the second in the series of Kansas Livestock Association, Kansas State University Ranch Management Field Days, set for this afternoon in Gove County at the Remington Ranch near Quinter. Among the featured topics there, utilizing cover crops and annual forages to bolster grazing opportunities for cattle, renovating older stressed windbreaks, as well as planning and establishing new windbreaks. Also, information about programs available to livestock producers through the USDA Risk Management Agency, and an overview of the new cattle traceability pilot project here in Kansas. The field day is set to start with registration at 3 o'clock this afternoon. It'll conclude with the free beef dinner at 6:45. All livestock producers, anybody else involved in the cattle business, invited to attend. The KLA, K-State Ranch Management Field Day at the Remington Ranch near Quinter, coming up this afternoon. For directions to this event, go to kla.org, kla.org. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University. And good to have you back once again. Eric Atkinson here. Today's agricultural news headlines in brief for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, negotiators from the U.S. and Mexico have made progress in narrowing differences on the update of the North American Free Trade Agreement. That's according to Mexico's Economy Minister, Alfonso Guajardo. And the steps to reach agreement could allow Canada to rejoin talks this week. That's what he told reporters as he entered meetings for the second day with U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. U.S. and Mexican officials have said they aim to conclude discussions this month. It's the third straight week that the ministers have traveled to Washington for meetings. Teams worked throughout the night changing the text and got a lot of work done, according to Guajardo. But the thornier issues are being left to the end, including the U.S. demand that NAFTA be approved every 5 years, a provision known as a sunset clause. Mexico has repeatedly said it opposes including such a clause. Now, the U.S. and Mexican negotiating teams have spent a lot of time on issues involving the auto industry. Guajardo said that they had reached an agreement on the U.S. demands that a share of vehicle components with duty-free treatment come from countries with high wages. A trade representative spokesperson declined to comment on the content of the discussions. Asked if Canada would rejoin the NAFTA talks this week, Guajardo said, hopefully. He said, in his words, we have to make sure that the U.S.-Mexico bilaterals are done, but there is no specific date to return to trilateral discussions, he said. Meantime, concerns from members of the Northern Plains Potato Growers Association surrounding the impact of renegotiation of NAFTA were raised with Senator Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota in her home state last week on the topic of NAFTA. She addressed concerns that the current agreement fails to ensure a level playing field for American producers, along with worries that the U.S. could end up withdrawing from the pact. Trade concerns are high on the list for the potato industry as North Dakota ranks 6th in the nation in overall potato production and first in red potato production. Heitkamp said that NAFTA is not perfect and needs to address its provisions that put some of our producers at an unfair disadvantage, in her words. But she added, throwing around disruptive rhetoric and threatening to withdraw is not the way to do it. Meanwhile, Heitkamp stressed the need to pass a full 5-year farm bill this year, especially given the current trade headwinds, saying that passing a farm bill before the current one expires at the end of September is absolutely critical. She added that she wanted to produce a final bill that will provide farmers with the certainty they need and expand their access to markets. Well, the surprisingly high USDA corn yield estimate from the crop production report last Friday was based partly on actual field ear counts. More on that from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
You've probably seen this already. USDA forecasting this season's average national corn yield to be record high, 178.4 bushels an acre, and the crop to be only 0.1% smaller than last season at 14.6 billion bushels.
And that would be the third highest production level ever. I should just note that only 4 times have we been above 14 billion bushels.
USDA's chief economist, Rob Johansson, a lot of people surprised by the high production estimate, but it was based on farmer surveys and evaluations of corn field plots, including ear counts. And he told us,
right now we're at record ears per acre, and now with the fill stage and pounds per ear, we could see that go up a little bit or down a little bit. So just starting at the fact that we do have record ears per acre is giving us a better estimate of our overall production.
And especially this season,
the crop's pretty far advanced, and so these numbers will be less likely to change compared to previous estimates.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And the Internal Revenue Service has outlined the rules on how farmers and others with pass-through business entities can claim the new Section 199A tax deduction, and tax experts say it includes several provisions favorable to producers. The new deduction allows businesses structured as sole proprietorships, partnerships, trusts, and S corporations to deduct 20% of their qualified business income. It does not apply to C corporations, which are tied compared to the 21% tax rate detailed in the new tax law. One of the more favorable provisions guides how multiple farm entities are treated. Commercial farm operations these days may have multiple LLCs owning different pieces of land, an S corporation that owns machinery and or another business entity that runs the farming operations. The regulations allow farmers to group all of these entities together if they meet certain criteria and treat it as one entity and have just one calculation to get the full deduction or coming close to getting the full deduction. There are still questions about how cash rent landlords and crop share landlords would qualify for the Section 199A. It appears those landlords won't qualify for the deduction if the land is being rented by unrelated parties. Next up on Agriculture Today, this week's edition of Tree Tales. Here's K-State forester Ryan Armbruster. Ryan?
Shortly after the First World War devastated Europe a century ago, another devastating force invaded that continent, eventually killing untold millions of elms. It was first described by a Dutch plant pathologist in 1921, lending the misleading name Dutch elm disease to this Asian killer of western elms. This pathogen reached North America in 1928, and trees began to die off en masse through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Spread by root grafts between trees, but more often by the European elm bark beetle, which carries the fungus from tree to tree as it feeds and reproduces, Dutch elm disease continues to kill elms across the country and across Kansas to this day. Symptoms begin with a small area of the tree's canopy yellowing and wilting, often as early as May or June, with decline progressing throughout the rest of the tree by the end of the year. Elms infected with the fungus often perish within the year. To limit the spread of Dutch elm disease, dead wood should be burned as soon as possible. Elm firewood cut in winter should be burned by February to eliminate the major source of new infestations, beetles emerging from the dead wood. For this reason, firewood movement represents a significant risk to the surviving elms in Kansas communities. Tree injections of fungicides can be used to help combat the disease, but cannot save a tree seriously impacted by Dutch elm disease. The best strategy is to plan on replanting a resistant elm. There are dozens of American elm hybrids available, which are all better options than the resistant, but unsightly and weedy Siberian elm. Nationally recognized long-term elm trials at the K-State John Pear Horticultural Center near Wichita has resulted in recommendations for Kansas, such as Alley, New Harmony, New Horizon, Accolade, and Princeton. While Dutch elm disease has killed millions of American elms and continues to do so each year, thanks to better sanitation in removing dead trees and the numerous resistant elms developed recently, we will still have elms in our communities for many generations to come. I'm Ryan Armbruster, Forest Health and Conservation Forester with the Kansas Forest Service, and this has been another Tree Tale.
Thanks, Ryan, and this is Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. While summer isn't officially over according to the calendar, summer break is ending for most K-12 students this week and next. Kansas 4-H Family and Consumer Science Program liaison Andrea Feldkamp says if students didn't do much reading, writing, or math over the summer, it's not too late to brush up on those skills.
Pull out some books and play some games that encourage your child to read so that they are able to be ready to roll with the start of the school year. Another important skill is also math. And this is a little bit easier to just put into the regular day. You can have them help with measuring skills with cooking. If you have animals, feed rations are another good way to help keep those math skills sharp. And even if there's some concession stand opportunities, I know through many of our 4-H youth or other organizations, there's an opportunity for kids to do that, helping to learn about money and counting back change. Those are excellent ways to practice those math skills. You can also just create a practice page, just think back to what they did that previous year and just do some highlights, whether that's money or time, addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division, and that'll help kind of refresh those things a little bit.
The other thing we should talk about is just getting ready to walk through the classroom doors, because there are some things that need to be done ahead of time. Clothes is always something that comes to mind.
Yes, I will tell you, kids grow, and they just never stop growing. This is definitely on my personal to-do list in this next weekend, is to go through that closet and see what really does still fit. One of my kids had shorts on that at the beginning of summer were well below the knee. Now they're quite definitely above the knee. So if other kids are similar, it's time to figure out what really does fit. This time of year, they do lots of sales. Lots of different places do back-to-school sales, and so those are good to check out. Some of our neighboring states, like Missouri and Oklahoma, offer a tax-free shopping day specifically for back-to-school. And so if you're able to take advantage of those, a lot of those coincide with that Labor Day holiday. That's a great time to really stock up on things and not have to pay sales tax. And you can kind of buy ahead maybe for the year if you pay attention. Yard sales are still in full swing, so you can pick up some deals there. And then even just checking out maybe an exchange with some friends or neighbors. We've done that and just swap kind of things back and forth. And so you don't have to buy a whole new wardrobe each time your child changes a size.
The school supplies probably next on the list?
Yes, school supplies. So everybody's got school supplies, right? You go into the store and you just can't miss it. So it's important to grab that list from the school, figure out what's needed, evaluate what you have, because scissors probably is likely still going to be able to be used another year. Things like glue and crayons, markers, probably not. But those consumables you can repurchase. Check out the backpack. We're going to get another year out of ours. Then, of course, making sure that everything's there that the list says, making sure they're labeled, and getting those ready to send a child on the first day or that back-to-school event.
One of the things we don't often think about is, where are they going to study? Can they do it in their room? Do they do it out in the front room? What is the designated area?
And most people think about studying, they're like, oh, well, when my kids are in middle school or high school, that's important to set up a study area. And really, it should be done much earlier, because even though younger children don't have the amount of reading that older children do, or maybe the time-wise, the amount of homework, it's still good to get in that habit early, because that helps prepare them for down the road. So some of the things to think about is some of the preferences that you have for studying. Do you like a place that's quiet? Do you like a place that has a lot of light or artificial light? Or are you wanting a place where you can keep your supplies at hand all the time, or would you rather have them in a box or a bag and bring those out when you're ready to do that? Do you need to be where mom and dad can help you, or can you do that independently? So parents can help talk with their child about those and get that special area set up so it's inviting. And the other important thing is the time. Be consistent each day. Come and study at this time. That way, it's a habit, and it just becomes a part of the child's day.
I always like to study with the radio on. Could not study with the TV on because it was too distracting. I'm assuming that cell phones probably enter this conversation somewhere.
Yes, I would say one of the things with cell phones, because they are a huge distraction, and they're very much a part of our preteen and definitely teen lives. So what I would practice is the phone goes someplace else. It's not in the area where the student is studying. Turn it off or silence it so there isn't that temptation to go grab it and see what's going on. Set aside that time for studying, and then after that, they can go back to that device.
The other thing that changes once school starts is our sleep patterns, because we tend to maybe stay up a little bit later in the summer, but we can't do that in the fall.
Right. And it's natural to stay up later because it's light longer in the summer, but people may have started noticing that the days are getting shorter. It's definitely in the mornings. It's not getting light as early. At nights, it's getting dark a little bit earlier. That will continue, obviously, until we have our time change. But to help get your student prepared, help them be ready for sleep, move that back a little bit earlier. And if at all possible, it's good to start a week ahead. Just start shaving a little bit of time off of that bedtime to get it back to that desirable time that you want it to be. So you start those bedtime routines a little bit earlier and help everybody get wrapped up. The other thing that can help is if you have room darkening blinds or shades, that can help provide the illusion that it's dark, and so the child will be ready to go to sleep, hopefully a little bit earlier. Just continue to stay consistent with that theme, because once they do get back into a new routine, they really will need that sleep.
Another good idea that you have is creating a household calendar, because there are so many activities that go on during the week.
Yes, and likely kids are just as busy as grown-ups. And you normally, as the adult, get to help get them to those activities. So it's good that everybody's aware of what's going on. And so just having a calendar where it's accessible by everyone in the house so they can see, you know what, today we've got soccer practice, or today we have a 4-H meeting, or today we have this for dad or this for mom. And so folks can see what's going on and they know who's taking care of things. We always review the week on Sunday at our house. And so we talk about what everyone's got going on and who's going to take care of what, sort of like who's on first, who's on second. So, you know, I'm picking kids up early this day so we can make it to this appointment, or I'm taking care of this, I've got to work late, or whatever the case may be, so that everybody's clear as far as what's going on.
A lot of things to think about. And really the main thing is to just be ready to go back to school.
Yes, there's some of that just goes to helping prepare your child for that. In particular for the younger ones, we have a kindergartner and we also have a preschooler. Time is really difficult to communicate to those younger children. So helping them understand by looking at a calendar, crossing off the days or counting the days until that happens, helping them understand what that schedule, that day is going to look like for them, will also help them be ready, helping them meet the teachers, see the classroom, some of those things to help reduce some of that anxiety. That's
Kansas 4-H Family and Consumer Science Program Liaison Andrea Feldkamp. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.